The Long Walk by Stephen King, aka Richard Bachmann, being the first book that Stephen King ever wrote, and for my money, still one of his finest, and probably the finest of the Bachmann books, and that by a pretty good margin. But what with the long awaited film adaptation of The Long Walk finally hitting theaters, I thought it might be a good time to reread this book and review it and see if it still ranked as highly in my esteem as it did the first time I read it, and also perhaps to milk that algorithm just a teensy bit while I'm at it. But I first read The Long Walk several years ago, and I remember thinking at the time that it was like upper tier King. And that's saying something because while I may have been infatuated with Stephen King at one time in my youth, by the time I read this book, I was well beyond that phase. And if you know me, you'll know that I'm not the biggest fan of Stephen King. I think he's written some real bangers, but I think he's also written a whole lot of shit. He's so long-winded, and so much of the time it just goes on and on and on, and the endings just suck so much, and the writing is just so artless at times. But getting away with myself there. Still, it should be a testament to this book that it impressed me as much as it did the first time I read it. So, like I say, I wanted to reread it and see if it still would, and I'm happy to report that it did. This book is still, in my estimation, one of Stephen King's finest works. Like, for me, it's probably top five. It's probably top five of his books because I think this is truly a powerhouse work, and I will, as per usual, give you my thoughts on it. So, if you're not familiar with The Long Walk, what is the book about then? The Long Walk takes place in an alternate dystopian United States in which there is an annual endurance competition, the titular Long Walk, which is overseen by a mysterious military figure only ever referred to as the Major, wherein 100 adolescent boys are made to walk without stopping at a speed of no less than 4 miles per hour until only one remains. And the winner gets the prize, which is apparently a lot of money and basically just whatever their heart's desire is. It seems like we're never sure exactly what the purpose of this competition is. It has some like game show kind of vibes to it because it's a big event that a lot of people observe and like place wagers on. But then again, it's also overseen by the military, so we don't really know what the point of it is. But the rules are pretty simple. You if you fall below 4 miles an hour, you're warned. You get 3 warnings. And then after you exceed 3 warnings, you get ticketed, which means you get a bullet to the dome or the guts if you're unfortunate. If you walk at the minimum speed limit for an hour, then you lose a warning, so you can get back down to 0 warnings. And there's no pit stops, no bathroom stops, no anything like that. It's continuous walking until only one remains, and the soldiers who are overseeing this like distribute rations and canteens to keep the kids alive, and that's pretty much it. It's a pretty low concept kind of thing, but King really gets some good miles, pun intended, out of this. It's really a pretty slick work, I have to say. So the main character of the book is one Ray Garrity from, like always, the state of Maine, and The Long Walk takes place in the state of Maine, or it starts in Maine anyway, as is kind of the norm with a Stephen King book. You know, Maine, just the spookiest, most messed up state in the Union, in the universe of Stephen King anyway. And so Ray Garrity gets into this, and he walks. That's again, that's the plot of the book. He walks. He makes the acquaintance of some other walkers, and then spoilers, I guess, he wins. Ray is the winner of The Long Walk. That's pretty much just the plot of the book. Like I say, it's pretty low concept, but King really does get a lot out of it, and it is quite an impressive read in my opinion. So let's talk about like the actual like technical qualities of the work. Let's start out with the writing because the writing in a Stephen King book is often a major gripe for me because Stephen King's writing is just so artless sometimes. He writes in that overly colloquial, down home, aw shucks kind of prose, which while it goes down easy, it's ugly at times. And Stephen King himself likened his own work at one point back in like the 80s, I think, in an interview with Playboy. I think he likened his own work to the literary equivalent of Big Mac with fries. It's greasy, it goes down easy, and it tastes good, but it's probably not the most healthy thing you're ever going to ingest. And, that has kind of been my experience when reading his books. And I don't like his writing so much of the time because it is so hokey. Like, it feels hokey at times, especially with the sheer amount of pop culture references and kind of painful similes and metaphors that he makes. But fortunately, the Long Walk is better in that regard. Now, this is not like Proust level prose or anything, but it's also not as cringy as it can be in some Stephen King books. I was actually pleased when rereading this that the writing is tidier and less colloquial than it is in some other Stephen King books. It's still not gonna like just astound you with its beauty, but it's not as corny as it can be. So in that regard, it gets a pass for me. It's not the most breathtakingly beautiful writing you're ever gonna come across, but it's not the worst that Stephen King has ever done. So I'll give it a pass. Now let's talk about the characters because character has always been the area where Stephen King has really shined. Stephen King has the ability to craft like really human, really like lifelike characters, and more so than a lot of mainstream authors can or do. And that's often kind of been the really remarkable thing about Stephen King is that you get a depth of character a lot of times in his books that you just don't get in normally in the type of genre fare that he writes in. That's always been kind of a standout aspect to his work. And I think that The Long Walk is no exception to that. It may not be quite as strong, quite as in-depth as it is in some of his other books, but it's also not weak. Ray Garrity is a pretty fleshed out character. His dad got squatted, that is to say, taken away and disposed of by the squads, which are kind of the enforcement agents of this kind of vague totalitarian government that exists in the world of this book. And so he kind of grew up mostly without a father, but he has a girlfriend that he cares a lot about, and he loves his mom, and he knows that he's kind of putting them through hell by undertaking this endeavor in which he stands a very high chance of dying. But he feels like a very real like teenage kid. And then there's other characters, of course, like Peter McVree, which is kind of his main acquaintance friend in this competition, who kind of looks out for him and saves him on a couple of occasions. He's a really good character as well, and he has a pretty good backstory. I think that makes him pretty human. Then there's other characters like Olson and Baker, but then perhaps the another real standout character is that of Stebbins, and Stebbins is kind of this enigmatic walker who no one really knows much about. He doesn't really speak that much. He kind of has a slightly unhinged personality. He's kind of aloof from the rest of them, but he turns out to be the major's bastard son, And he is also a very memorable presence just because of how distinct he is from the others. It may not be like the greatest character work that Stephen King has ever done in his career, but it's good enough. I think. I think it's definitely good enough. I did care about these characters. In fact, some of the deaths actually hit pretty hard in this, and again, that's a real testament to its to the skill that went into it. So I think the characters are good. So now let's talk about like the actual story and the world of the story, because this is, I guess, an alternate history novel, but it's very ambiguous, and almost nothing is really explained. But that's actually a big positive in my book, because it leaves you kind of wanting more. It's very vague. Nothing is ever, or very little is ever explicitly explained about how this world came to be. But it has a nice atmosphere of mystery to it, a nice aura of enigma, which really kind of hooks you, I think. And again, sometimes less is more, and King definitely was going for that tone with the backstory of this world. So it's not a dystopian future, though. That's the thing. It is not. This book does not take place in the future. This book takes place in, seemingly, in the 1970s of this America, which doesn't really differ all that much, seemingly, from uh, actual 1970s America. Like, John Travolta is still an actor in this. Um, Day-to-day life seems to be largely the same, but there's just little hints here and there throughout the book that things went differently, particularly around like World War II. There's just the briefest of mentions that there was some kind of aerial battle on the east coast of America uh, in World War II, which I don't think that happened in real life. And then also there's just this one little like brief mention that there are 51 states in the Union in this world. So you're kind of wondering like what is the 51st state? Um, it's again, it doesn't dwell on any of that, and the whole thing pretty much takes place during the long walk, and it doesn't really veer off course, pun intended, perhaps, um, regarding the backstory and the lore of the world. But again, I liked that because it kept it feeling mysterious and cryptic, and I think that added to the strength of this book. But also, another thing that I really have to commend this book for is that it is not overly long, and that is something that I cannot say for a lot of Stephen King's books. When this book was published, Stephen King was still firmly under the thumb of an editor, and that's why I would say that the majority of Stephen King's like best works came out in the 70s and 80s, back when he was still restrained by an editor. You know, when you hit the 90s and now the 90s, 2000s, and now when he can basically just do whatever the hell he wants, you get these books that just never freaking end. They're just so overlong. And like what he did with The Stand when he went back in and put all that extra crap back in, was like, that didn't add anything to the story. I'm getting off topic again, but anyway, this book is much better paced and much more concise than a lot of Stephen King's books can be, and that's a major plus in my book, because it doesn't overstay its welcome. It is very well paced, again, walking pun, I suppose. And I liked that. And now, as to the ending, because again, a lot of Stephen King's endings are just pure shit. The ending to this book, I can see some people not liking, but as for me, I don't really know that he could have ended it better. Like, like Ray, like Ray wins the thing. Garrity wins the competition, and that's that's kind of, I mean, that's kind of known from the get go. In fact, that might have been one of the only things that I can really complain about this book, is that you pretty much know right out the gate who the winner is going to be, because it has a clear cut protagonist. And I think if I was to attempt to write this book, I would have written it, if I could, without having one of the characters be so plainly the main character. I think it could have been more suspenseful that way. But Garrity wins, and then at the end, he kind of just is hallucinating due to exhaustion and begins to run. So it ends. It has kind of a little bit of like thematic heft to the end, I guess. But a lot of people might not like the ending. But personally, for me, I thought it was fine. I don't know that he really could have ended it any better than that. So yeah, that is kind of my thoughts on the book. To rate The Long Walk, I can't believe I'm doing this because there are so few Stephen King books that I can give this honor to. But I'm actually going to give The Long Walk an unqualified A plus. I really, really like this book. It is definitely one of his best books still, in my opinion. Again, top five for me, easily top five. There really isn't anything like objectively that I can really complain about. Again, I would have written it without having a clearly defined main character. I think you could have increased the suspense that way. But other than that, the writing, it's not, again, it's not Proust level, but it's also not as bad as Stephen King can get. The characters are good, solid enough, and the story is just really gripping, and it's well paced, and the world that it takes place in is mysterious, and it kind of enthralls you because of that, or did me anyway. And also, another thing to say about The Long Walk is that this is one of the comparatively few Stephen King books that I might venture to say actually has like a little bit of literary merit to it. Stephen King is mainly like, your mass market, mainstream, like genre fair type writer. Not a lot of his books would I say really count as like literary fiction, but The Long Walk I think might just qualify because, if only because this is a book that the reader can read so much into. Again, the way that The Long Walk is never really explained, what the point of it is, and it's so kind of just vague as to the point of it. I think that it kind of lends itself to a slight like existential interpretation. You can kind of read into this a lot, and a lot of people have read into this as some kind of like anti-war story, with The Long Walk being some kind of metaphor for military conscription. I mean, it may have been. I think King wrote this during the Vietnam War, so it may be, that may be a valid interpretation. But it definitely feels like something that you can read into, and it does get ponderous at times, more ponderous than most of Stephen King's books are wont to get. There is a little bit, just a teensy bit of actual like reflection in this. And so, you know what? I'll be charitable and say that not only is The Long Walk one of the best of Stephen King's books, and probably the best Bachman book, it may be a Stephen King book that actually has a little bit of real literary merit to it. I think it would qualify for me anyway. So yeah, once again, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I actually am giving a Stephen King book an A plus. That is what The Long Walk gets for me. I think it's a fantastic book. It's very impressive that King wrote this as young as he did. He wrote it in college, I think. And it definitely showcases someone who was born to tell stories. Stephen King may not always be the best writer, but he can tell a damn fine story. He can spin a damn fine yarn when he's on his game anyway. And I think this evinces that marvelously. Long Walk, a fantastic book, A plus once again for me. I love The Long Walk, and it's probably like top five for me in his complete bibliography. So, The Long Walk by Stephen King, aka Richard Bachman. Have you read The Long Walk? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said today. And if you haven't read The Long Walk, I could highly recommend this book, especially if you just want to read a Stephen King book and you never have, and you want to like read one of his books that represents him like on his game at his best. This is definitely that, in my opinion. So I could definitely recommend this. It is great entertainment, but it also has just the teensy bit of actual thought and like reflection in it. So again, it is definitely like top tier King for me. And once again, I could definitely recommend it for prospective readers out there. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.